Welcome to the third dimension. 41 years now since the establishment of the General People Congress, Yemen's biggest political party in modern history. The departure of its founder and leader, former President Abdullah Saleh, who was described as linchpin in the complex twists and turns of coups, revolutions and nation building of Yemen's recent history, resounded loudly across Yemen and the region. Meanwhile, the General People Congress Party appears headed for a crisis currently. Its movements, meetings, statements herald a split within it between factions in Sana'a and another abroad. According to some observers, the party members need to show a collective will that prioritizes the interests of the country and the unity of the party. To discuss the history and the current status of the General People's Congress Party, join me from Los Angeles, Mr. فرناندو Carvajal. Fernando is a former member of the United Nations panel of experts in Yemen. He is a senior researcher focusing on the geopolitics of Yemen, mainly the GPC and the Houthis. Welcome to the third dimension, Mr. Fernando.
Thank you very much.
If I may begin, Fernando, with this, the General People's Congress Party, when it was established in 1982, it was established as a political party, not as a political party, but an umbrella for all national factions. Or, in your words, it was always a coalition, but after unification, it moved to a single party rule. How would you assess these two phases in the General Congress Party?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Very unique situations in northern Yemen, in Sana'a, after 1978, when Ali Abdullah Saleh became president of the Yemen Arab Republic. Pretty much, I was thinking about this, and pretty much the situation much like today, right, where Ali Abdullah Saleh takes over, becomes president, when Sana'a was ruled by, remember, that since 1962, there was a revolutionary council and then a military council that was in charge of politics in North Yemen. And pretty much early in the 1980s, when we begin seeing the evolution of Ali Abdullah Saleh's presidency, we see the creation of the General People's Party, the Al-Mu'tamar, which not only becomes an umbrella of the political figures, the military, the tribes, but also it's an evolution from what we saw in Taiz and Sana'a with the cooperative movements, how the cooperatives brought together the people in a sort of participatory system from Taiz all the way north to Sana'a and Amran. And then Ali Abdullah Saleh and the elite in Sana'a create this umbrella entity, the Congress, Al-Mu'tamar, where, you know, it is giving the name, the image of the peoples, but it was in reality an umbrella for the elite in order to create stability. After 1990, we begin the history of political parties in the Republic of Yemen, because Ali Abdullah Saleh and the North had to adapt to the Socialist Party from Aden, from the South. This was a highly centralized political party, a Soviet-style centralized political party that presented some challenges to Sana'a, to the northern elite, and they had to create a partner, a similar body that would compete, because after all, it was the politics of alliances, the politics of coalitions. And then we have the rise of the Sunni Islamist party, Al-Islah, which comes into the equation in a very pluralist system, which is the first in the peninsula, right? We also have to recognize that Yemen was definitely at the forefront of the political system.
Yeah.
And creating plurality.
Yes, we will talk about that. Okay, Fernando. Of course, we cannot talk about the GPC, Al-Mu'tamar, okay, without talking about its founder, former President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Let me just bring an observer describing his political weight, Fernando. He says, whatever views one may have about his politics, Saleh demonstrated extraordinary political maneuvering skills, making him the longest serving president in the country in modern history. Not only did he negotiate the complexities of Yemen's social structure, but also navigated the management of a republic in the Arabian Peninsula where absolute monarchies prevail. How do you comment on this?
Absolutely. The history, when I started studying Yemen, one of the things that kept coming up was the unique survival of Ali Abdullah Saleh. Ali Abdullah Saleh comes into the presidency, a troubled presidency after two presidents were assassinated. Many people that I've talked to from his generation said that he was not expected to survive 6 months, never mind a year, never mind 33 years. At the helm of the Yemen, whether it was the North or the Republic of Yemen. So definitely his survival, he definitely adapted. He was relatively young, in his early 30s when he took over. But let's also remember that it was a triumvirate. Yeah, the ruling elite of 1978 made sure that the tribes, the military, were aligned. And they all fell behind Ali Abdullah Saleh to support him through the 80s. Definitely 1990 came to a surprise to everyone. And in comparison, as you mentioned, the longest serving president in Yemen, North and South. You don't have anybody in the South that survived that long either after assassinations. But in Sana'a, his survival was definitely unique. Surviving through 1990 was definitely unique as well.
Okay. If we just, the last thing about history, Fernando, and then we will indulge into the current situation of the GPC, okay? President Saleh, through the GPC, okay, attempted to what we call form a rare model of democracy in the region, okay? How do you assess that democratic model that President Saleh tried to find?
It was definitely an attempt at an emerging democracy. Let's remember that Sana'a hosted the first conference of the emerging democracies. I believe it was 1999. What we have in 2009, I gave a presentation. 2009, I gave a presentation about the 2006 presidential election, and this image always sticks to my mind, and it was an image of three pictures posted during the election across from the general staff office main entrance gate, and it was Ali Abdullah Saleh in his normal traditional white dress with the jacket, and it was him in a Western suit, and then him in a military uniform. And the way I presented this is these were the personas of the persona of the leader, of the modern leader in Yemen, that he was trying to portray. He was the traditional Qabili, the traditional tribesman. He was the traditional military strongman since 1962. And then in a nice expensive suit, especially after the Georgia meeting of the G8, it was him as the modern statesman. And with this image, it came the narrative of democratization, right? You could not have in Yemen, in the Arabian Peninsula, you cannot have a leader in a Western suit that was a monarch, that was a military ruler, right? He knew how to present his image, not just to the Yemeni people as a whole, but to the outside world. And this was the image he wanted the outside world to see, the modern statesman. And definitely with him playing with the idea of democratization in the Arabian Peninsula as a novel idea, as an outside idea. It was a challenge for Yemen, taking steps by steps. Again, in 1999, aligning with the emerging democracies, that was a huge signal to the monarchies in the GCC, right? him hosting this conference in Sana'a, it was a huge signal to the monarchies. Later on, holding a number of parliamentary elections rather than just appointing the members of the Shura Council was a big step in itself. And in 2006, one of his major projects, or something that he tried to sell Yemenis and the outside world, was his project of devolution, meaning in 2006 was the first time that Yemenis voted for a governor, for their governor.
True.
Before that, the president appointed every governor in the republic. But in 2006, Yemenis got to vote for their governor. Yeah. This was a big step in his project of democratization, which itself was a challenge to his coalition partners, right? To the political parties inside Yemen, that not only did they have to compete for the presidency or for an alliance, now they had to compete at every province position of governor.
Okay. In the context of this democratic model, Fernando, okay, looking at Yemen and the tribal nature of Yemen, again, President Saleh, through leadership of the GPC, pushed for what we call wider women political participation, which was again another challenge in a very conservative society. How do you comment on that?
This was definitely, the Mu'tamar always was at the forefront of women, including women, and putting them in the public sphere, right? Having a female face in public to a very limited capacity, to not extremely satisfying to a lot of Yemeni women, but nonetheless, it was the only political party that was doing this. Let's keep in mind that in 2010, December 2010, the conflict that begins in December 2010, that leads into the Arab Spring or the popular uprising, is the issue at the parliament where Al Mu'tamar, the GPC, introduces a bill expanding the quota for women ministers of parliament. This was a big shock to the other parties. They didn't know how they were going to compete. They didn't want Ali Abdullah Saleh or the Mu'tamar to move too fast because they were not ready themselves. And we're talking about Islah and other parties like Al-Haq, the Zaidi political party. So definitely the bringing the women to the public sphere was something that he knew he could use in his relation with the West, that this is what the West was demanding. All the Western embassies, the Western NGOs, the UN, were demanding an expanded environment for women participation. And so the other political parties were not as accepting at the time, meaning between 2006 and 2010. So this amendment to the Constitution or to the rules of Parliament definitely were a big challenge for the other political party.
Okay, so as we are talking about, again, his relationship with the West in the same context, Fernando, another important issue that President Saleh dealt with was the safety of global maritime, the safety, security of the Red Sea, etc., and the war on terror, okay? So how do you assess, okay, the manipulation of that important stage in Yemen's history?
Definitely, the security of the maritime lanes was a huge priority for Western governments. I was in Yemen, I was in Sana'a when the U.S. Ambassador Barbara Dean was pushing for more assistance for the Coast Guard, for example. The big debate was whether Yemen should create a bigger navy to handle its coast in the Red Sea, the Aden Gulf, and the Arabian Sea, or if a more capable Coast Guard could handle this responsibility. And so the U.S. was at the forefront providing security equipment, boats, training for the Coast Guard, the Yemeni Coast Guard at that time in the early 2000s. And then remember 9/11, well, before. My first time in Yemen was actually right before the USS Cole was bombed in Aden. And so I remember how the US moved into the counterterrorism file in Yemen. Soon after that, in a much wider and stronger aggressive manner with direct policies, funding. For Ali Abdullah Saleh, it was always a problematic file. Let's remember that the first drone strike was also in Yemen.
Yes.
And this created a big problem for Ali Abdullah Saleh at the time when the U.S. killed a car full of AQ. At that time, it was just Al-Qaeda operatives in Yemen.
Yeah.
And it brought a lot of challenges domestically to Ali Abdullah Saleh because it allowed the Sunni Islamists, the Al-Islah and other Sunni Islamists, the Salafis, to put more pressure on Saleh, not just because of this operation and everything, but the way that he was partnering with the U.S. and add to the domestic dimension, the neighbors, the Gulf monarchies were very concerned at how close Ali Abdullah Saleh was getting to, let's say, President George Bush soon after 9/11.
Yeah. Okay. Now, if we just move to the present, Fernando. Okay. Now, looking at the current political reality of the GPC or المؤتمر nowadays, and of course we know that the departure of President Saleh left a power vacuum both within his party and in Yemen. Okay. In your opinion, Fernando, how do you think the GPC or المؤتمر can regain its organizational unity and subsequently regaining the state and ending the Houthi coup?
Without a doubt, this is al-Mu'tamar's greatest challenge. You know, how do you regain that charismatic leader, you know, that unifying leader with the right narrative? Today, the narrative for that charismatic leader would be very different to that narrative adopted by Ali Abdullah Saleh up until, let's say, 2011, right? The factions that we see in Sana'a co-opted by the Houthis by now, we can't really say that there is a Mu'tamar in Sana'a. And then we see the factions in the neighboring countries whose leaders or representatives are surviving. Right, this is survival mode. The minute that these leaders abandoned the GPC collapses. So what some of these leaders are doing is merely maintaining the label, the entity that is the GPC. One of the main things that I think I've noted and I've mentioned to you before is really the big opportunity that Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi missed. Right before he was pushed out of the presidency and since April 2022. He has disappeared. He was the longtime vice president, head of Al-Mu'tamar under Ali Abdullah Saleh since 1994. So since after the Civil War, and he was giving the position as vice president of the Republic. And he missed a huge opportunity right before being pushed out of the presidency in 2022. And since then, by being absent, he has proven a lot of people, a lot of his critics from the GPC, a lot of the Ali Abdullah Saleh supporters, he has proven them right for a long time since 2022 when they said that Abdul Rabo did not represent them, that Abdul Rabo did not represent the GPC, not just because of the so-called betrayal of February 2012, but because of the trajectory between 2012 and April 2022.
Okay.
Today, with all due respect to Sheikh Barakani, he has not, been able to live up to these challenges and bring the coalition of the GPC, whether it's in Taiz or in Hadramaut or in the Tihama. And President Rashad, who is a longtime GPC member, he is also having a lot of trouble trying to recreate the leadership of the GPC. Other people that I've talked to, especially when I worked at the UN, said there's no need to revive the GPC. So this is the other question. This is what the rivals are asking. But if I go back to my initial comment in the history, this type of environment with conflict and with the creation of a council, this is where the GPC was born in 1982, right? And so the challenges are, finding a leader that the masses fall behind, follow, support, finding a narrative, and finding a relevance. Is the GPC needs to find its relevance today amid the conflict in the republic, whether it's a federal system or a two-state system that is a de facto environment today.
Yeah. Now, do you think, Fernando, building on the, I would say, long experience of the GPC or المؤتمر in what we call governance, okay, do you think the international community can play a role in which it can enable this political party with such an accumulative experience to have an important role in this time of crisis, I mean?
Right. So this is one of those consequences that, again, in the absence of a leader, even the youth, we don't see a young leader in the GPC anywhere. Not in Taiz, not in Tehama, not in the south, not in Marib, definitely not in Sana'a. One of those consequences for the GPC is the length of time between Ali Abdullah's assassination in December 2017 and today. That the Houthis started in 2017, early 2017, with the Mushrif system, right? With the supervisors, the shadow government, all throughout the ministries. This was created in order to chip away from the GPC's hold on the bureaucracy, right? The technocrats, the men and women with experience in every ministry and every government entity. The Houthis created this Mushrif system in order to eventually remove them. And today, that's what we see in Sana'a. There is no bureaucracy in Sana'a. There are no technocrats in Sana'a because the Houthis have pushed them all away, either by force, put them in jail, killing them, or the salaries. People not getting paid, they just stop going to work. And then this allows the Houthis to put in their substitutes and to put in a loyalist that really is not a bureaucrat, is not a technocrat, and it's meant to destroy that a government entity. On the other hand, in the liberated areas, this is an even bigger challenge because all of these southern entities were manned, where the civil servants were from allied from the Islah or GPC, the GPC, right? So in the time of this conflict, where the government's not paying salaries in the liberated areas either, where people are moving from civil service, from teaching everything into military and security forces, it is chipping away. So the longer time it takes to rebuild the state, to stabilize government entities, government organizations, government institutions, the easier it is that to push out that generation with experience, with bureaucratic experience, with education, the technocrats that know how to run a ministry, a university. And if we look down the line another year or so under the current situation, you already hear the talk of the failed state, right, along the liberated areas. And you do have a de facto two-state line at the moment. You have the Houthi-controlled area, you have the liberated areas. If the government institutions are not working in the Houthi areas and they're not working in the liberated areas, you have a failed state situation. The international community can definitely help by pushing for salaries to be paid every month, not just every quarter or every 6 months, every month, and for a return of the civil service. This is needed. The state institutions in the interim capital, Aden, need to be rebuilt, and they need to be done quickly before we do have the case of a failed state.
Okay. A final thought, perhaps, Fernando. Okay. As a person who has lived in Yemen for quite a long time, and you also enjoyed good relationships with المؤتمر GPC, etc. Okay, what would you recommend by the end of this interview, okay, in order for the GPC or المؤتمر party to get rid of this, I would say, political installment?
If the members of the GPC want to remain relevant, they need to prioritize cohesion, they need to prioritize a strategy, they need to prioritize the people. You cannot claim to be the leaders of the country when you are not in public asking for electricity, basic services in the interim capital, which would, I assume, eventually you want to take over, which I assume you want to govern. You need to connect with the people. Taiz is a center for the GPC, historical center for the GPC, right? Because you bring up Ali Abdullah Saleh. Ali Abdullah Saleh created his career as a military person, leader in Taiz and then Sana'a. Yes. The President Rashad al-Alimi is from Taiz. Sultan al-Barakani is from Taiz. Prime Minister Ma'in is from Taiz. So when you put this package together, the GPC has done nothing since 2017 in order to take back that role.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, there are leaders out there who are charismatic, who have a link to the people, to their followers, to their membership, military, tribal, civilian, bureaucrat, technocrat. But that person needs to come up. It needs to come up to the surface, yeah, claim that role, and put the people as a priority for the GPC, for the Mu'tamar. It is the people, it is the General People's Congress. And you can no longer dance around that narrative.
Yeah.
And you need to prioritize the people, their welfare, their well-being, their education, their healthcare,
yeah,
and their commerce. And so a charismatic leader that comes up with a good strategy will be able to regain a role, the relevance of the GPC. Until that person comes to the surface and takes on that role and that challenge, that is very challenging at the moment,
yeah,
the GPC will face an uphill fight for the next few years.
Yeah. Perhaps we can get such a charismatic leader soon, Fernando. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for talking to Yemen Today TV again.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
That's all for this time. See you next week with a new edition of The Third Dimension.